Hey guys, Scotty the Trainer here, and that's how I see it. So, I had a couple of friends of mine that said, hey, listen, with all this been going on, where's Scotty the Trainer been? And I told them, I said, Scotty the Trainer is where he's always been. Training, advising, teaching, doing everything that he can to take care of his family, himself, and those that are around him. So, here we are. People are self-quarantining. People are practicing social isolation. People are either one side or the other. What I found, there is no in between. People are either, you know what, this isn't a big deal, or people are just freaking out over everything. You see that when you hear stories of people that work in grocery stores and grocery chains, and there's 100 people lined up outside the door waiting for them to open so they can take off and take all of the toilet paper, all of the eggs, all of the milk. And it's amazing to me what's been going on. And people have said, how do we deal with this? How are we going to deal with it? Because most of us have never seen anything like this before. Well, I want to show you something. Most of you know that I have a theological background. You know that I have degrees in theology. You know that I travel and speak in the religious realm, church realm, spiritual realm. You know that I'm all about proper self-help. You know that I'm all about being able to be motivated, inspired, and educated as much as we can. So I want to show you something. So right here, and you can do this if you have a Bible or know someone that has a Bible. You can take that Bible and you can turn to the Old Testament. And if you open up the Old Testament right here, the book of Malachi, that's actually the last book of the Old Testament. And you can read down through here the very last book and the last chapter of the Old Testament. And then you're going to see this. A blank page. And then you're going to turn and you may see a few more blank pages. And then you're going to say, oh look, the New Testament. And then you're going to turn over to the book of Matthew. And you're going to get Matthew chapter 1. Where in the world Jesus Christ in the Middle East found a disciple with a name like Matthew, I have no idea, but let's go with it. Now, that blank page right there, in between the last page of the Old Testament and the first page of the New Testament, this blank page right here represents count them, 400 years of silence. Nobody heard anything from heaven. 400 years. Now I want you to think about that for a minute. The writing of the Old Testament, whether you believe it or not, historically, by the time the Old Testament was finished, to the recording of the New Testament, and we're not getting into theology, basically just historical stuff here, 400 years. 400 years of absolute silence. Nothing from heaven. No minister was preaching a message coming out of the church or into the street or coming down from the mountain saying, I've heard from God. 400 years. What do you suppose people did during that time? They weren't facing a pandemic, but they were facing nobody's heard anything. Have you heard from the Lord? Have you heard from God? Have you heard this? Have you heard that? Nobody had heard anything. I suppose that during that time, there were a couple of things that were in mind, and maybe, just maybe, these things might help us today. One, I would suppose they had to hold on to the last promise that they'd been given. They had a promise at some point. They were hearing from heaven. They were hearing inspiring words. They were hearing from the universe. They were hearing from the Lord. They were hearing from their Creator. And then all of a sudden, nothing. So I would suppose for those 400 years, they had to hold on to the last words, the last promises that they had. I would say to you, if you were hopeful and inspired before you even heard about this COVID-19 or Wuhan virus or coronavirus or whatever you want to call it, before this happened, I would suppose whatever your favorite verse was, your favorite motivational saying was, your favorite belief that kept you up was and kept you inspired, I would say to you, keep holding on to that. Because if it was working before the virus, it's going to work now. Whether it's 15 days, 21 days, a month, whatever it is, you have to hold on to what the last thing was that you heard that was inspiring to you. These people for 400 years heard nothing. So I would suppose, number one, they had to hold on to the last thing that they heard from heaven. The second thing that I would suppose is this. They kept believing that there would be another word, that another word would come forward. And there was, because eventually something comes breaking through the 400 years of silence, and it is the birth of Christ. Now, something is going to come breaking through. We're already hearing words that China is starting to face recovery. Now, if that's true, we're about 2.5 months, 3 months, somewhere in there behind China if we handle this correctly. And so we have to keep thinking we're going to get through this. And we are. And we're going to get back to some sense of normalcy. And we are. But what good does it do for any of us to run around with the sky is falling? Because if you do that, you've given up, number one, the last thing that you were holding on to that was giving you motivation, inspiration, and education, and faith, and power, and all of that. You've given that up, and you've also given up the future. Now, you've given up anything good that happened in the past, and you've given up anything that could possibly be good that happens in the future, which means you're running around destroying your present. And that's not the way to go. Now, people have to do what they feel is necessary. If you're staying at home and closing the doors and pulling the blinds, you say, I'm not coming out, then you do that. Other people, you still have to go to work and do what you have to do and make a living. Other people are making adaptive changes, whatever you have to do. But you have to hold on to the promises that were given to you, to the words that you hold on to that held you during dark days will still work right now. And you have to look forward. It's not always going to be like this. It changed from where we were to where we are. And as short as anything, and you can write this down, history shows us it will change again. So during those blank pages, those blank days, you got to hold on to what you were told. And you got to believe there's more to come. Well, you're going to have to just forgive me for taking this much time because I haven't said anything in a little while on Facebook and on YouTube. But now that I have, I'm Scotty the Trainer. That's how I see it.